I ignored all the red flags and recently found out my ex had been cheating on me for months. I 23F had been in a relationship with my ex-boyfriend 27M for just about 6 months. He was perfect for me and I believed he was everything I could have ever wanted. I thought about moving in with him after I graduated college. I wanted to marry him and live out my entire life with him. I know it probably sounds like too soon to think about that kind of stuff since we hadn't even been together for a year, but he made me feel so incredibly special since the first day we started speaking. Looking back, this was absolutely a love bombing situation and I can tell he just wanted me to become attached to him so I wouldn't feel comfortable enough to leave. We met on Hinge in October and practically spent all of our time together up until February when he told me he felt anxious about having me over his house after he got into some issues with his roommates. When March rolled along, I started to feel our relationship dynamic completely change from him being extremely interested in me and investing all of his time into me to being too anxious, or too tired, to spend any time with me. We still saw each other quite frequently, but something felt different now. Our locations were shared with each other, but his only ever said, "No location found." One day I tried asking him about it by telling me to let me fix something on his phone, but he wouldn't let me touch it no matter what. He never let me look at his phone or use it for absolutely anything, and I never really thought about it before until this moment because he seemed like under no circumstances could I use his phone for anything. I just kept asking to see it so I could do something and I wasn't being specific, but he was able to figure out I was talking about his location when I didn't mention it at all yet. It's like he knew his location didn't work this whole time when every time I asked him about it before saying, "Why doesn't it work? Can you fix it?" he claimed he didn't know. Once I confirmed that's what I was going to fix, he immediately changed a setting on the Find My iPhone app and the problem was solved. I was pretty sad and confused the rest of the day, but I let it go for the most part. I kept questioning whether he had this setting off on purpose because my friend told me that it was. She tried telling me that he knew what he was doing, but I found it hard to believe her even though the evidence was right in my face. This was still so odd to me because back in December he had looked through my entire phone while I was sleeping trying to find evidence of me cheating when I was giving him all of the loving and caring energy he was giving me. It didn't feel fair at all and I never assumed he was out talking to other people at this point, so it felt really. On my birthday March he let me go to his house for the first time in over a month and I found a women's deodorant that wasn't mine in his room and felt a huge pit of anxiety fill into my stomach. I asked him whose it was and why that was in his room and all he could say was that he had no idea. I ended up letting that go as well, but it still was super confusing to me. I think I just convinced myself it was probably one of his roommate's deodorants that rolled into his room somehow, or that the dog had brought it in there. I couldn't really imagine him doing anything to ever hurt me because of how often we talked about infidelity and loyalty in our relationship. We felt disgusted by it and told each other that we'd never do that and if we wanted to it would be better to just go our separate ways. This instilled so much trust into me that I decided to not make a big deal out of it. April came around and I still wasn't able to visit his house, especially after he said his roommates were incredibly upset with him for inviting friends over one night and they got so drunk that one of them pissed on their couch in the basement. GHT, this was a pretty reasonable thing to be anxious about. But I was his girlfriend and they knew me, so I thought I could be an exception. Still, he didn't let me come over again until this past Friday when the truth came out. But throughout April and May we had barely seen each other at all. He'd come to my dorm to sleep over and hang out sometimes, but that was it. We didn't go out, I wasn't spending time with him and his friends, and he was still too tired and anxious to do things with me. I started feeling really lonely and anxious because our relationship was nothing like this for the first few months. He even stopped complimenting me and we hadn't had satisfying since February. Even when we tried he couldn't stay up and never came, so I felt like there was something wrong with me and he wasn't interested in me anymore. He told me it was his anxiety, so I understood, but it still made me upset because none of my needs were being met anymore. I didn't feel nearly as special to him as I did before. He still went out with his friends too, even after work when he claimed he was tired and had no energy and wanted to go home. He even ditched me one night after promising to come sleep over my dorm but ended up hanging out with his friends instead and never responded to my texts after I got upset. He said his friends offered him rides home if they hung out with him after work, so he did because he didn't have a car since February. I thought all this time he was just not feeling well lately because of the life problems he was having. He didn't have a car for a few months and spent all his money on Uber. He felt like his roommates didn't like him and want me to come over. He said his paychecks were trash for weeks. He gave me these excuses as to why nothing felt right anymore and why we couldn't see each other, and I still believed him because I remembered how confident and happy I felt with our relationship in the beginning. He said it was going to be that way again every time I was upset about it, or upset with how he had been treating me lately. There is definitely much more I can say about his behavior towards me at times that made me feel extremely anxious and guilty about myself, but there is too much to mention, and it was basically a bunch of manipulation and dismissiveness towards my feelings. All of these things combined made me feel like I should probably leave, but I couldn't because he threw me breadcrumbs of affection whenever I asked for it. My friends and family didn't even like him because of how often I vented to them about the things he said and did to me. He promised he would try to change and be better and show me he loved me more, but he couldn't. Now I can tell it was because for about a month or two he had been cheating on me. On Thursday he finally hung out with me for the first time in over a week. He spent $30 on an Uber to get me to his house. I really needed time with him at this point, so I was extremely excited to see him again. We went to go get him a haircut and visited his old friend at one of his previous jobs and got dinner at a bar. The entire time at the bar he was giving me almost no attention, which is what had been happening for months whenever we hung out anymore. He never looked at me or complimented me or showed me he was interested. The only time he'd say something was if it was about something he saw on the internet, because that's all he did. His phone was in his hand constantly and we almost never spoke about anything. I was pretty upset because we hadn't seen each other in so long and I didn't know why he seemed indifferent to my presence. After we got back to his house he took a nap. We still weren't talking much when he woke up and just out South Park on the TV to keep me entertained. That night I expressed my feelings to him about how I felt ignored and lonely and like we weren't even friends anymore because he didn't want to talk and didn't enjoy spending time with me. He didn't say much, but I didn't want to start an argument and we fell asleep a while later. Friday morning came along. I didn't sleep well because I felt anxious about my relationship with him. I got up while he was sleeping and started looking for this note I wrote for him that came with a teddy bear of his favorite animal I ordered about a week earlier to make him feel better about how he was feeling lately. I couldn't find it, so I looked in his drawers, which was something I did that was never weird to either of us, especially because I kept some of my things in there too. Instead of the note I found another girl's face moisturizer and one of those perfumes where the packaging is shaped like a shoe. I instantly knew he was cheating on me. This is why he didn't want me to come over. This is why he had stopped giving me all his time, love and affection. This is why I didn't feel special anymore. I woke him up and said, "You're cheating on me." He acted like he didn't know what I was talking about, so I showed him what I found. All he could do was say, "Why are you looking through my drawers at 8 a.m., and nothing else?" I started panicking and was angrier at him than I ever have been in our whole 7 months of knowing each other. I asked why, with who, when, and got no answers. "Are you cheating on me? Why did you do this? Can you please say something, just tell me the truth?" His response was, "And then what?" I felt so betrayed and hurt I just started packing what I could find of my things and yelled at him. I told him he was and I did nothing to deserve this and I never would have done this to him. I said, "We've talked about cheating and you told me you never would. How could you do this to me? What did I do to deserve this?" He gave me no answers and didn't seem to care at all. I called my friend and told her to pick me up from his house and she came as soon as she could. He asked who I called and told me he would order me an Uber. I said no and that I never wanted to speak to him again. He just let me leave and didn't text me anything. My friend and I hung out with a girl who knew him because her ex-boyfriend was friends with mine. She was shocked at what I said because she thought we had broken up for a month already. She said in early April she got a call from her ex while my boyfriend and him were hanging out, introducing her to his new girlfriend. I felt disgusted and completely betrayed. He lied to me for so long and still strung me along. Why did he keep me in his life if he didn't want me there? I am so confused about this, and it came as a complete shock to me because I could only see the good parts of him and trusted him with my entire life, to the point where I ignored all the red flags in our relationship. I stayed with him after all the times he made me feel crazy and like I was too overwhelming, and he kept me there just to cheat on me. This girl also told me about his former coworker who he had me meet and hang out with one night. She said he tried getting with her before me and that it was incredibly weird he would put us in the same environment together. The day I hung out with this girl, who is 19 by the way, we went to a bar we liked and she spoon-fed him a piece of pasta and he ate it. I felt weirded out and confronted him about it and he said that there's nothing between them and she's like a sister to him. That should have been my first sign to leave. I sent him a hurt and angry text saying that he did me dirty and then blocked him. After hours and hours of venting, I decided to journal about how I felt about the situation and ended up sending him the message. I blocked him again right after so I don't have to see what he says if he ever answered back, which I honestly don't expect he ever will. I don't expect any kind of apology or regret from him because of how he acted on that day. He didn't seem to care a single bit, and he never has anything to say when I express my feelings about him, whether it's good or bad. Almost every type of communication we would have about our relationship was met with either anger, dismissiveness, or a slight apology. There was so much thinking I had to do and so many pieces of the puzzle I had to put together to understand why and when this was happening. I'm still so incredibly hurt by it and I'm having a really hard time dealing with this. Was I really being that dumb to trust my boyfriend when he was showing me all these signs that he didn't want me?